Now, I would like to invite Dr. Anjali Sahay, who is an associate professor, Department of Political, Legal and International Studies, Gannon University. Dr. Sahay she is a multifaceted personality, apart from being a program director of various programs in her university. She is also the resident faculty of CNET for teachers. It seems. Dr. Sahay also successfully runs the Model UN program at Gannon, East Carolina, and Old Dominion universities. She has been doing this for almost 2 decades. Her area of research is on international migration, international relations. Her book, titled Indian Diaspora in the United States, Brain Drain or Brain Gain, has received much appreciation in the academic world. And apart from being an educator, Dr. Sahay is also a leader, author, researcher, and a performing artist of Indian classical dance. That's very interesting. And she is trained in Kathak, and we really hope to see her performance sometime. I welcome Dr. Sahay. Please go ahead with your 7 minutes. Can you hear us, Professor Sahay?
Sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, for your kind introduction. I'm going to try to do this in 7 minutes, but it will be hard. So I would like to start with a very brief introduction part that I always like to add. So I'm also an international student that came to the United States 21 years ago. So this topic is very dear to my heart because of our own educational experiences that we faced in the United States. One of my broad conclusions, and I'm starting with conclusions so that I can flow from that. These are the overall conclusions that I have. There are two main impacts on migration currently. These are both political and health. And if we look at these as independent variables, both of these are impacting student migration. And overall, I'd like to believe that the political weighs in much higher than the health will in the long term, because as an optimist, I believe that this pandemic will eventually lessen and die away. But it's a political factors that have always impacted student migration into the United States. This is also not the first time that an external event has directly impacted student immigration into the United States. One of the biggest events was 9/11, and we saw post 9/11 how student migration was heavily impacted in the United States. So I'm not going to go over the statistics for Indian immigration into the United States for international students because various presenters as well as Dr. Pandey, you already mentioned in your introduction to this webinar today. But just to reiterate that Indians are the second highest international student cohort in the United States after China, followed by South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. So these are the top five countries of origin for international students. And I will focus on Indian immigration, student immigration, because I was told to focus on the Indian immigration per se. So in terms of field of study, as can be probably guessed, most Indian students opt to study in the STEM fields. Engineering, business management, math, and computer science are the top three fields of study for international students from India. And also, they tend to be almost entirely in the graduate programs as compared to the undergraduate programs in the United States. So, moving on to the impact of the pandemic versus the host country, I'd like to take a completely political view on this and start with saying that while the world was grappling with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and how this would impact the immigration, it's very important to note that even prior to the pandemic even began, in terms of the current U.S. administration, already largely cut off immigration to the United States. It's part of its overall immigration policy, and this just continued during the pandemic. We have various examples, such as um, the processing of new visas for H-1Bs and the new student visas. All of this went down dramatically. When the pandemic actually started, the USCIS, which is charged with the processing for immigration applications, they had already closed. They were not processing any other new applications. So there are various political executive orders that came out that directly impacts the student migration. And if we look at particularly the year 2016 and 2017, we note that the growth fell sharply in 2017 and 2018 academic years. Prior to these years, the Indian student immigration had actually doubled in numbers, and that was a notable increase in the size of student immigration into the United States. But after 2016 and 17, if we look at those years, then this numbers dropped down dramatically. And to highlight how important this is, if you look at the Indians enrolled in graduate level computer science and engineering programs, they declined sharply by almost 67% in the U.S. universities, and that's pretty good number to take into account. So prior to the pandemic, I just want to mention one related aspect that's pretty important for the students' decision to migrate. Eventually, the student migrant who comes to the United States, the end result of that is that they expect 3 years of optional practical training, and after that, they expect to get jobs in the United States. So when there were announcements that no new H-1Bs would be processed in the United States, that had a trickle down effect on new student applications as well. So I'm almost at 6 minutes, so I'm going to go straight to the COVID COVID hurdles. Clearly, the some of the biggest hurdles has been the ban on international flights, so students cannot come into the country. But when it was announced, as we've already talked about it, that if you cannot be in a complete face-to-face classrooms, then you cannot be considered international students. This would already have a direct impact on students who would want to come to the United States. So I have 3 or 4 clear impacts that I would like to mention as part of my conclusion. So with the pandemic, we see for Indian student immigrants that there will be a definite dip in the demand for US student visas for this year, for both China and India specifically. Second, universities will face a fall in revenue, especially if a large number of Indian students stay away because they are enrolled in the graduate STEM programs. And in an article that I have published previously, a lot of universities are looking to open remote campuses in various Asian countries. So we're just going to see more of that. Um, More restrictive immigration policies in the United States will lead to a shift in the flow of international students to Canada, which has seen as much as a 127% increase in the last 4 years of Indian students moving out of the United States and moving into Canada because of their, more open door policy. And this is the last thing that we have all talked about is that with the global talent war, that every country is trying to retain the best and the brightest, especially in the STEM fields. What we are now seeing is a self-inflicted American brain drain since the election of President Trump in the last 4 years. So my overall recommendation, I'm out of time, is that leaders of both countries have not looked at migration. We have seen President Trump's visit to India in February and Prime Minister Modi's visit to United States last year. It was a very warm, engaging partnership between the two leaders, but we are not seeing that warmth flow into the migration side of things and how that can be eased up for people traveling from India to the United States. So I'll stop now and maybe take questions during the Q&A session at the end. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sahay. This was really interesting. And in your discussion, when you pointed out that there was a decrease in Indian students in US in those 2 years, that trend was being diverted to Australia, and Australia
Mhm.
was gaining the numbers actually during the time when it was decreasing in US. The data says that. So thank you very much for this.